Now the first question from the woman who was the doorkeeper that let him in. Matthew, it's way later after all the events that Jesus went through. 26:69. Now, I use Peter sat outside in the palace. So then it continues, and a damsel came to him saying, you also were with Jesus of Nazareth. Mark 14:66. I still haven't used and as Peter was beneath. I had a thought about that. Maybe I can use the beneath. It mentions outside twice. The point of view of the reader was focused on Peter. Then we switch to what's happening with Jesus. Then in verse 69, this is Matthew, it goes back to Peter, so it makes sense to say, now Peter sat outside in the palace again, so that you know, okay, we're thinking about some other event right now. And I think that's what's going on in Mark. Verse 66, and as Peter was beneath in the palace, we're switching from talking about Jesus and imagining what he's going through to now imagining what Peter's going through. So that is a transition word, beneath. Maybe I can use that after I first speak about Jesus, which will come after the first denial, and I'll use this to transition our point of view to thinking about Peter for the second denial. Now I'll just use the second half of 66. There comes one of the maids of the high priest. So Matthew again. And a damsel came to him. Mark. There comes one of the maids of the high priest. And when she saw Peter warming himself, she looked upon him. Luke. But a certain maid beheld him. So she has to come to him first in Mark. As he sat by the fire. I can add warming himself there. Then I need to add this important phrase. And earnestly looked upon him. She must be trying to make sure she's right. And said this man was with him. John. Then says the damsel that kept the door to Peter. So I'm not going to have that she says anything yet, but I will have the damsel that kept the door, because this is explaining what her job is. So only from John, the damsel that kept the door. Luke, a certain maid. Instead of a certain, this maid is explained in John. The damsel that kept the door. So I'm going to have that instead of a certain maid. So I'm just going to get rid of a certain maid from Luke. Mark, there comes one of the maids. So instead of one of the maids, actually I think I could have both. One of the maids of the high priest, the damsel that kept the door. One, specifically, of the many maids, the one that kept the door. So yeah, I'm going to go with Mark. And Matthew, a damsel. So I can use damsel where it says in John. And. Should I start with and? There comes one of the maids. So I could start with, and there comes one of the maids. Luke. But a certain maid beheld him. I could use that. Actually, that would make sense because he's clearly trying to hide who he is. He's not announcing himself. The fact that he's recognized is the surprise. Or I could use John. Then one of the maids. No, I think I'm going to use that for when she earnestly looked upon him. But a certain maid beheld him as he sat by the fire, then earnestly looked upon him. So first she saw him, and it's like she did a double take. She's really trying to recognize him before she states it out loud. So I'm going to begin, but a certain maid. But not a certain, again, Mark. There comes one of the maids. Actually, if I want to use there comes, I want to use came instead of there comes. Came, okay, there is came in Matthew. But there came. So, but from Luke, now Mark, there, now Matthew came, one of the maids of the high priest. That's all Mark. Then John, the damsel that kept the door. Or, you know what? Maybe I should put the damsel that kept the door first, then one of the maids of the high priest. Yeah, that should be first, because she was already introduced. She's the one that brought him in. So, yeah, we need to pick up from where we last know of her. The damsel that kept the door, and then add more information of who she is. One of the maids of the high priest. Yeah, okay. So this is John, the damsel add from Matthew, that kept the door. This is what she's saying. In John, the verse says, then says the damsel that kept the door to Peter. So says and to Peter I'm going to save for later. I'll have said to Peter. And I can say maid is in Luke. Doesn't have the S, but that word is part of the word used, so I could do that. Maid. I don't think this verse starts off quite well. I have, but there came the damsel that kept the door. There came the damsel that kept the door. That's okay, but I think it's even better if I use then from John, but then came the damsel, because our focus is still on what Peter's going through. So if the woman shows up, you could say the damsel came, there came. But that's kind of a more general point of view. It's just happening. But if you're focused on what's happening to Peter, you would say then in that timeline, that situation, he's in this situation, but then something interrupts where he's trying to hide who he is. I think then does work better. So John, then came the damsel that kept the door. One of the maids of the high priest. And beheld. Okay, I need and beheld. So I'm going to use and before earnestly looked. So I use and. Still Luke, but earlier. Beheld him as he sat by the fire. Mark. When she saw Peter warming himself. I think I could put both. First she saw him. Or no, saw and beheld are the same. Should I pick between the two? I would have to start with saw. I could go when she saw Peter warming himself, and beheld him as he sat by the fire, then earnestly looked upon him. So that could be it. She saw him, then she did a double take, and then it'd be like a triple take. Earnestly beheld. And Matthew, she's just saying. Mark also has a double take. It's just with totally different words. Saw and looked, whereas Luke uses beheld and earnestly looked. Okay, well, looked, I guess, is the same. Earnestly looked, I'll just combine looked. So still, it's the first one. Saw or beheld. Or should I have three? Saw and beheld, and then earnestly looked. You know what? I think I should go with beheld and not all three, because she did see him when she opened the door. That's probably the first seeing. Then when she comes back is her beholding and her earnestly looking. That's probably when the suspicions are getting so strong that she feels she needs to say something. So I'm going to leave out when she saw Peter. No. I can't just ignore when. When this happened. Yeah, I'm going to put warming himself here. Sat by the fire, warming himself. So that's Mark. Before and when. So this is Mark. And when she saw Peter and beheld him. But there came the damsel that kept the door, one of the maids of the high priest, and when she saw Peter and beheld him as he sat by the fire warming himself, oh no, I would need another she. She earnestly looked. Oh no, there's she. She looked upon him. Okay, so yeah. Still in Mark. She, now not just looked upon him, but from Luke, earnestly both looked upon him. Matthew then has, came to him saying, Mark looked upon him and said, Luke looked upon him and said, John says. I remember what I was going to do. And said from Mark and Luke, then from Matthew to him. But it's not just him. John names him Peter. But I don't want to repeat Peter's name because he was just named in the first verse. When she saw Peter. I'm going to go with Matthew to him. And I'll just combine this mention of Peter's name from John with Mark.